Alrighty, so what I wanted to do is I really wanted to kind of finish up the modeling for this guy so that we could definitely start to examine UV and wrapping. All right, because we've got a pretty good model at this point for this guy. Remember, if you go 4, it goes to object mode, and we can hit 2 or 3 to put us into whatever kind of vertex, edge, or edit mode we want. Now, one of the things you'll notice, and some of you guys haven't quite done this yet, really easy to do, you notice how I've got extra edge loops at the joints, right? So remember, all you have to do is just go loop cut, right? Alt-C, and you could add loops wherever you need to on the leg, right? That's going to be really, really useful for adding these little joints, right? So make sure wherever you've kind of got to have a bend, wherever you've got a bend, right, you really kind of want to make sure to have some extra edge loops, right? And you can see that's where I've got that nice little thing, right where these sharp bends happen. You should at least have 3. You notice how that really gives you the ability to keep the volume proper and have the bend work. But you can see it lets you kind of move some edges a little bit, right? So if I hit T or 2 for edges and I bring this up and in, right? You see how I can really kind of, make him pumped crab, like he's been working out, right? So remember that that's actually quite useful. You really want to be able to take advantage of having these extra edge loops in here. Even places like right here, right? Having this extra edge loop here really allows me to curve it a lot more, arch it a lot more, right? So keep in mind that that's one of the things that you could still definitely be doing on your modeling is just make sure to go into loop cut and just add some extra loops kind of right through these areas, right? Like there, right? Not through this way, right? You want to be careful, but like these directions, right? Because it's really going to allow you to add a little more detail to the form of this guy. So I did want to kind of address and talk about that at least a little bit here. But at this point, we've kind of covered all the basic stuff, right? We even did the shell, right? And that allowed us to explore the shrink wrap modifier and our snapping tools. Other than that, we were just using loop cut, tweak, move, rotate, scale, extrude to kind of build this. We did see, of course, I provided some extra options for selection tools, like the select loop interregions useful, select linked, right? Shortest path. There's actually some pretty nice selection tools in Blender, right? It's overall got a pretty strong selection tool set. And I just want to make sure to kind of go over those as some options, right, that you didn't have to quite use yet but are available to if you want, right? And of course, faces has the solidify option, right? You'll notice even when you're in face mode, 3 for faces, if you right-click, you won't see solidify in here. Like I said, these right-click menus give you most of your tools, right? They really do. But occasionally you'll find 1 or 2 that just aren't in there, and you might have to go to the vertex edge face here, right? These will always have pretty much all the tools. So remember, there is this nice little kind of menu up here. And this is the thing, if you've ever used before Blender 2.8, the interface was just horrible, right? And even certain workflow things were just bad. So one of the reasons why I didn't start becoming a fan of Blender until the 2.8 series came out about, I think, roughly about a year ago. And even then, it was a couple months in before I really sat down and started using it. And I was like, oh, this is a world of difference. So the 2.8 above series is really where, for me, Blender started becoming a truly legit package, legit software that can compete with everybody else and do it for free. They really just took the best of workflows, particularly if you use industry compatible, as well as interface ideas from like Maya and Modo, which have strong user-friendly qualities. Modo in particular is the software I used to use, and it's actually still pretty great software. Just Blender kind of has matched it for like free. So keep that in mind, right? Even if you're forgetting to right-click to get the options, you will have these things. And occasionally we'll have to go here to get a tool like Solidify Faces. But we saw that thickens this guy, right? And we're going to see every one of the tools I've shown you on this crab, we're going to see on our later projects, right? So there's going to be a tremendous amount of reinforcement of these ideas that we've been seeing later on. We're going to use solidify and retopper tools on our quadruped at the end of the year. We're going to be using a lot of extrusion and loop cut on those things. Even when we do our car and our environment stuff, we're going to see a lot of those things. So everything you've seen on this crab, you're going to see many times again throughout the whole year, because they're great tools, and it's how you do a lot of modeling. And we just want to do it on a crab that gave us enough to make something reasonably cool and complicated enough that we could take a term on it, but not so crazy that we can't do it as our first model, right? It's meant to be an easier model, but one that's not super ridiculous cakewalk, right? So at this point, though, we really have kind of hit pretty much everything we wanted to do, right? We've got a little bit of armor on it. We've got a little bit of the crab body in looking good shape. And I just want to kind of talk about a few of those things a little bit. One of the things I maybe want to do is maybe sharpen up the armor here a little bit. So remember, I'll hit 4, right? 4 is the quick key for object mode. But remember, they are here. There is a menu for this, right? So the nice thing is, even if you're not using the quick keys, which you should because they're great, they make everything faster, right? The actual overall interface menu systems are really good and quite user-friendly now in Blender. So remember, there is actually this little pull-down menu here that has edit and object mode. You'll see later on we use sculpt mode and texture paint mode. And you see they have their own quick keys, which is great. But for us right now, we're just kind of in these modes. Remember, they have quick keys. 1 for edit mode, 4 for object mode, and then of course 2 and 3 can do edit mode edge, edit mode face, right? So really edit mode is 1, 2, and 3, and they just pick a different part of the edit mode, either vertices, edges, or faces. But in 4, for object mode, we can switch to our different objects, right? Remember, they are here kind of in the collection area. You can rename them, turn the visibility off and on for them. And what I wanted to do is I just wanted to sharpen this edge up a little bit. Because in subdivisions, it kind of rounds things off, right? It kind of, you can actually technically see that there's really, particularly going to 3, you'll notice it kind of looks like there's extra polygons here, right? Because technically there is, right? There actually is extra polygons there, right? Technically in subdivisional surfaces, particularly since it's default viewport level 1, you actually have 4 quads here, right? We're just only able to work with one of them. That's what's cool about subdivisional surfaces. You'll also notice it kind of rounds the shape off, right? If I was to turn off this in edit mode, right, that little triangle in our subdivision surface modifier, because that's the bottom one. We have 2 modifiers on right now, right? Mirror and our subdivision surface one, right? This monitor is a little small, so you can't quite see the names for it, but that's what I'm working on in here. It's at Lathrop. But here, when you turn that off, you can actually see the proper low resolution shape. This is what the actual model would look like. So if I just got rid of that modifier, that's what the actual geometry looks like, right? It's not properly subdivided. I'm going to undo that because I want the... or in this case, I'll just go back and reapply it, right? It's really easy to just reapply it. Didn't want to do that there. There we go. That one. So I'll just apply subdivision surface modifier. But I kind of wanted to make sure to address this element a little bit for you guys, right? That there's actually this extra stuff. And you'll notice that not turning these triangles on kind of makes it display differently, right? So I always kind of turn this little kind of triangle on for these things because it lets you see everything properly through the modifier even when you're in edit mode, because that's really what it's about, is it's kind of showing you the cage stuff directly on the surface. So I always turn those on to see properly everything what I want to see. All right. But there's really technically virtually extra polygons there when you're in subdivisional surfaces. You just can't edit them. And that's actually great because it makes it really easy to get nice, rounded, organic stuff without having to add tons of polygons. All right. So what I want to do is I just want to sharpen up some of these shapes a little bit. And the way we could do that is with our loop cut, believe it or not. So if I go to the loop cut tool, right? Remember, extrude's right here. Loop cut's right there, but we have great quick keys. Are default for them. You don't have to assign these. Control E for extrude. Alt C. They're great quick keys for that. In fact, Control E is the extrude quick key in Maya. Alt C is actually your add loop key in Modo. So they've actually, with the newest versions of Blender and industry compatible all that stuff, they basically stole a lot of stuff from Maya and Modo, and that's honestly some great places to steal from. So if we were to put a loop cut in this way, right? You see how it's kind of wrapping around that direction? And remember, by default, and I love the little preview it gives you because it really lets you see which way it's going to go. By default, if you just left click, it puts it right in the center, right? And you can see that it already sharpens it up a bit. But remember, if you left click drag, you can drag it along the surface. And you'll notice if I drag it this direction, that makes that even sharper here. And I can always go and I can put one down here. And you see how that sharpens up the subdivisional surface? That's because the rounding that's occurring, because a subdivisional surface rounds the shape off a bit, right? That's part of what makes it really cool. The actual shape, though, now is smaller, right? So if I turn my loop cut tool off, or just turn on my tweak tool, you'll notice if we move this further away, it becomes softer. Move it higher up, it gets sharper. So what's really happening here is by adding these extra edge loops, this rounding that the subdivision surface does, it's still doing it, but it's in a smaller area, and so it looks sharper, right? So it's one of those things, add edge loops close to corners, and you'll see that you still get that bit of roundness that you want, but it's smaller, and so it looks more like a sharp bevel. So if I was to maybe put a loop cut here, you see how that sharpens that up, but it depends on how close it is to whatever edge loop you're putting it on. So that's something great to know about, right? That's something great to know about that can allow you to sharpen up the shape a little bit if you want to, right? And of course, we can always, double left click on an edge, W for move, bring this out just a little bit, maybe even double click on that one. You see how you can always still adjust these. Remember, that's the other thing too, is this is never done. You can take any one of these, and even though you're not retopoing anymore, you can adjust it, right? Anything that you can select, you can move, rotate, or scale, right? Remember, just using W for move, E for rotate, R for scale. That stuff's always there and available for you. All right. So I just wanted to sharpen this up a little bit, tighten the shape up a little bit, just so it's got a nice little bit more organic feel to it. Maybe double click on that edge loop, move it out a little bit. And if we needed to, Alt-C for loop cut, we could put an extra loop in there. W for move, and you see how we could still actually, after the fact, adjust the shape. Remember, F is your frame, right? It frames your selection, so whatever's selected, it'll frame that. And we can just keep coming in here, and if we want to, we can just kind of make little adjustments. So even though our retopo is great, you might find after the fact that you're like, oh, I want to make a little adjustment, right? Don't be afraid of making little adjustments afterwards. Retopo is awesome, but it doesn't, doesn't mean you can't adjust it later on as well. So remember, W for move, E for rotate, R for scale. Double left click selects an edge loop, right? And even Alt-C or loop cut, you can put edge loops in that sharpen the shape up. Particularly if you drag them closer to the corner, it takes that rounding and it just makes it smaller. You see that area is now smaller than it used to be, and so it's just shrinking that rounding, and it looks sharper. It looks more like a bevel. We'll see the bevel tool a lot when we do our environment modeling, right? When we do our scene, we're going to build some furniture and things like that, and we're going to work a lot more without subdivisional surface modifiers, and you're going to see a lot more of the bevel tool. But when you're working with subdivisional surface modifiers, just adding edge loops close to corners will kind of make the rounding that the subdivisional surface does smaller, and so it looks kind of sharper, right? While still having a little bit of rounding, right? And we'll talk about that more on our later projects, but basically all things have bevels, otherwise they'd cut you, right? So even monitors and things like computers, if you actually look at the corners that look sharp, they're actually not. They have a small or sometimes a large rounded corner on them, so you're not bleeding everywhere. Because if something's actually razor sharp, that's a razor, right? That's a knife. So believe it or not, most things that you actually touch that are hard objects actually have small or large rounded corners on them that keep you from cutting yourself. And that's what we're kind of trying to do here, is just make that look a little bit sharper. All right. So one of the last things we want to do for this guy is we notice that if we get rid of these, right? So I'm going to hit 4 for object mode. I'm going to click on the body, right? If I was to get rid of that modifier, that's what the low res looks like. That's not good. That's actually quite horrible. So let's kind of apply the subdivisional surface modifier again. So what's happening here is we were using the subdivisional surface modifier as a preview of what the future would look like, right? So here's one of my biggest rules, and all my students that were with me last year know this. We're going to keep talking about the whole year. If you use a subdivisional surface modifier, at some point you apply it, right? You don't delete it, you apply it, right? You want to apply this. We were using this as a shortcut, right? We were shaping with a simpler version of it, but we get all the nice rounded shapes from the subdivisional surface modifier, right? That's important. Anytime you ever use a subdivisional surface modifier, apply that at some point, right? It doesn't have to be early in the process. It could be when you're basically done, right? But apply it. You want your low resolutions to look good. And you saw that when I turned that off, when I deleted that modifier, subdivisional surface modifier, it looked horrible. All movies and video games want to have good-looking low-resolution meshes. Video games, particularly since you're in a game design high school, very important. When you're playing a video game, that's what you're getting. You're not playing a video game and the character's 15 million polygons running around. Maybe, like if you've seen the Unreal 5 engine demo running on the PS5, okay, yeah, in a couple of years when Unreal 5 is pretty standard, we might start to not have to worry about polygon counts even in games, but for right now, we still have to. You generally want your low-resolution mesh to look nice, right? You want it to look good. It gives an animator enough geometry so that not only do they know how the silhouette's going to look when it's animating, but how it's going to collide with other objects. A generally really strong rule is that your lowest resolution version of the model should look pretty darn nice, right? We're just using the subdivisional surface modifier to save us from having to add all these edge loops in by hand. Could you imagine how much more time-consuming and harder it would be to add in every edge loop with loop cut and do a bunch of shaping to make sure it's rounded like this? It takes more time. That's not a wrong way to do it, but it's a harder, more time-consuming way to do it, particularly when you have subdivisional surface modifiers. So watch what happens when I apply this. And in fact, usually you want to apply these in the order that you set them up, because if I just apply the subdivisional surface modifier right now, you'll notice the seam kind of shows up, right? It gets a little sharp there. So what I do is I just undid the apply. I apply the mirror first, boom, and then the subdivisional surface modifier. And now if we go to 3 for face mode, that's actually our low resolution mesh now. That's actually it in low resolution. And you can see what was happening with that subdivisional surface modifier is you kind of virtually had 4 extra polygons for each quad, and they kind of created that roundness for shape. So now you have a low resolution because there's no subdivisional surface modifier. These are real polygons you work with. Not only can you now work with these to adjust shape some more, but you now have a low res that looks pretty darn good, right? That actually looks pretty darn good. And that's what you want. You want low reses that look nice. Depending on the game, depending on the game engine, depending on its film, it can be more polygons in your low res or less, but you pretty much always want your low res to look as nice as possible. We're just using a subdivision surface modifier to make it a lot easier for us. So I'll hit 4 to go back to object mode, and I'll go to the shell here, the little kind of armor made for him. And we apply the mirror first, right? So that way we get that nice seam to kind of clip together and keep rounded. And then we apply the subdivision surface modifier. And now you can see that that's our low res. Really cool, right? Now we actually have our low res crab ready to go. You can even see down here at the bottom, there's a little counter for triangles, and that shows you this crab with armor and body is 5,000 triangles. 2,360 quads. In terms of the vast majority of games nowadays, 5,000 triangles or below is really low resolution, right? If you're playing on a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One or a nice PC, your character's creatures can easily be 30, 40, 50,000 polygons, depending on if it's a hero character or an NPC. So this is really low resolution. If this was like a really small crab creature, that's pretty much the appropriate polygon count. If this would be a giant boss crab creature that's bigger than your lead character, your hero character, you could easily make it like 30, 40,000 triangles, 50, 100,000. Like basically really, really important characters get more polygons. Secondary characters or really small critters get less. But we can see that even using subdivisional surfaces and applying them, our polygon count is still quite low for the vast majority of studios. Games, definitely film. Right? But we do know it looks pretty good in low res, and there's enough geometry that will deform reasonably well. The more geometry you have, the better it deforms also. If you guys have played enough really old PlayStation 2 games, you notice how sometimes they don't have all their fingers. They just do texturing for fingers because they didn't have enough polygons. You'll notice when elbows or knees bend, they look really sharp and like they could stab you. I call them dagger elbows and dagger knees. PlayStation 2 couldn't run nearly as many polygons. By the time we get to PlayStation 4, easily thousands and tens of thousands of polygons. So there's almost always enough geometry to get you pretty decent deformation. Because remember, characters animate, they change shape. All right, so that'll be a great place, I think, to end this video. But I just wanted to kind of talk about some shaping stuff, about how you can add loops in, how you can even add loops in to kind of do a little bit of sharpening of this shape. And then just applying the actual modifiers we had, like the mirror and the subdivisional surface, and explain a little more about what the subdivisional surface was actually doing for us. And we'll keep talking about that on our different projects. But that gives us a crab that's now in pretty good shape for our modeling purposes.